Hello out there, and welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. My name's Fred Cobb. I'm the Executive Vice President and CISO at InfoSystems, and I'm fortunate today to have with me again cybersecurity consultant Garrett Boyd, also at InfoSystems. Garrett, happy Friday, and thank you for carving out some time with me today.
Yeah, Fred, thanks for having me, and hello, everyone.
Thank you. So we're just going to get right into it because I'm pretty excited about this one. I'm excited about them all, by the way, but this one in particular. So we're going to continue our discussion around the Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls. And we have made it all the way up to Foundational Control number 9. So we're almost in the double digits, folks. So for those of you out there that have been listening in, much appreciated. Hopefully we've covered some good material for you. But this particular one is near and dear to my heart, having fairly extensive background in networking, and this is a great way, if followed the way CIS lays it out, you can really do some hardening of your environment. So, Garrett, we're going to talk about controlling access to ports, protocols, and services. So let's just jump right into it. So. We talked about right before the show, taping the show here, you were thinking about using the Star Wars Death Star analogy. I kind of like that idea. So you want to mention that briefly as how that ties into maybe a way to circumvent defenses or find that hole to get in and attack.
Sure, Fred, and I can't take credit for making that up, so I have to put that out. So credit goes to someone else. But yeah, so the Star Wars Death Star, as many of you might know, and if you don't know, we'll tell you that it was the Empire's supposed to be impenetrable weapon. So they've secured it with the latest, greatest technology. Supposed to be indestructible, but in all their thinking. They left a port open, and they were able to be exploited by using, the exhaust port, basically, so that triggered a chain of events and caused the end of the Death Star. So just that analogy alone, it really ties into, a company who really tries to implement a next-gen firewall or next-gen AV, but all of a sudden they have open ports off on their external network that they're able to be accessed by anyone, or at least discovered by anyone who has a type of a scanner, whether it be Nessus, Nmap, or OpenBoss, things like that. So that's the Star Wars Death Star analogy. So thanks, Fred, for bringing that up.
Sure thing. Yeah, I like to think about it a slightly different way. I think about the common ports. If you've been around the industry for a while, just through osmosis, they're in your mind. Like, if you think about, web page or hypertext transport protocol, HTTP protocol, typical port is 80. If you're using a secure socket layer, a more secure way to access that page, it's specifically port 443. Can those be changed to non-standard ports? Absolutely. And that's a way to maybe a little bit of security by obscurity. You may hide a web page or a website on a different port as part of your overall security process or ways of doing things. And then you got, I think of those highways. If I'm going down the road and I need to talk to my DNS server to get some name resolution, I would take Highway 53. That's the highway or the port to talk to a DNS server. So there's all these different names, associated with services, associated with ports that if you're doing any sort of external type connectivity, if you're connecting from your internal network to a web page, if you're connecting from your internal network to one of the core DNS servers out there, main DNS servers, you're going to have these types of protocols, ports open through your firewall, or even internally east to west type traffic as opposed to north south traffic that you have to, in order to conduct business, in order for the network to run, you have to have these ports open. But there's some things we can do to control them. Garrett, you want to elaborate on maybe controlling unnecessary ports or unnecessary services. That's an important facet of what we're talking about, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think first off, taking inventory of what's operating in your environment is essential. I think, CIS controls, HARPs, and really the central theme is an inventory of whether it be asset inventory, hardware inventory, software inventory. Well, with the scan, it's going to provide you, with that asset inventory and hardware inventory, you get a Nessus scan or something to the effect where you're basically going out to each one of your hosts and seeing what ports and protocols and services that are running on those systems. And then you go about looking at that list and saying, why does this computer here have a SQL Server on it? Or why does this computer here have IIS on it? And then you can go about addressing those situations.
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause for this special message. Security analysts believe cyber attacks will continue to escalate throughout 2020 and are recommending that every company, regardless of industry or size, place immediate focus on cybersecurity training and the tools that will protect you from these attacks. Did you know that you can book a cybersecurity assessment right now with Fred Cobb's team of cybersecurity engineers at InfoSystems? They will help you discover exactly where you are most vulnerable to a cyber attack and make recommendations on how to strengthen your defense in those areas. This is urgent. It's an issue that affects everyone in our community. Visit the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz to request your cybersecurity assessment. Now back to the podcast.
So yeah, the first thing to do would be to get an inventory going on what's in your network. You can't really support or can't patch what you don't know is there. So you need to run some type of scanner to look at what ports and protocols are open. We use Nessus a lot here in our environment that can go through and actually look at each host, and from there you can create a baseline and go about correcting those issues or whatever ports that don't need to be open on those endpoints. You can go about addressing those slowly but surely by uninstalling applications that might have added those ports to be open.
Exactly. And if you take a document such as a hardening guide from Microsoft or a hardening guide from a hardware vendor, a Cisco device, or you take a Center for Internet Security CIS benchmark, or you take, if you're more, a Department of Defense or Department of Energy focused, you may have a STIG, a technical information guide that you can use. And the common thread throughout those documents is if you don't need that specific service running that uses that specific port, take it away. Disable the service, remove the service, shut down the port, all of those things, because it's key to understand that we as ethical workers in the IT industry, we know these ports. Well, guess what? So do the bad guys. So one of the things that they will do, they'll, just like you talked about a moment ago, Garrett, on doing scans to determine what's out there so you can harden your environment. Now, the bad guys are out there doing scans against your network too. It's common to see Nmap or network mapper scan if you got defense capabilities that will alert you when that type of scan is happening against your perimeter defenses. It's a very common thing for the bad guys to be out there scanning networks. I think one of the things that I'm really keen on is deception protocol, or the old school way of thinking about it was honeypotting. You want to talk about that for just a moment?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great way to kind of test who's out there banging on your external IPs or external ports and protocols. Certain technologies like a Packet Viper would have something where you can set up a honeypot, or deception technology where you can broadcast the FTP server to basically see what people are doing on your or who's trying to access your systems. And from there, you can go about blocking those external IPs or just gathering as much data as you can about them. But ultimately, you probably want to block them. Of course, that IP address will change, so it could be a game of whack-a-mole. But at least you can kind of get an analysis of what is being done on your network, or are you a big threat or not? Well, something like a honeypot or deception technology will say, yeah, the threat is real. These people are out there trying to get in.
Yeah, one of the cool things about the Packet Viper-like technology is that in the old days, again, to create a honeypot, you would almost have to create a network where you stand up a SQL server, you stand up a domain controller, you stand up an FTP server, DNS server, all these different services or all these different applications, and you would advertise them maybe in a sandbox network. And the goal there was to have the attacker attack those exposed services, those applications that you had to literally stand up. And then you could gather intel on the attacker, where they're coming from, what's the particular exploit, what's the payload they're trying to deliver through the exploit, et cetera. Nice thing about some of the newer technology you mentioned was that you don't necessarily have to stand up full-fledged servers with these services running on them. You can advertise through the technology, hey, I've got a SQL server here, come and attack me. Or I've got an RDP gateway here, which is a huge no-no exposed to the internet, come and attack that. So deception protocol, I think, is just now starting to gain momentum. And I'm glad to see that there's products out there. I keep mentioning Packet Viper name, but it's really cutting edge, and it's one of the more easier ones to implement for that type of defense. So I guess some of the things you could do, if you want to touch on this, Garrett, in addition to disabling ports that aren't in use, disabling unnecessary services, are there anything else that comes to mind as far as how to protect service ports, network ports?
Yeah, Fred. Once you have established a baseline, what needs to be operating in your environment. You can do things on your perimeter firewall to shut down, let's say, port 3389 to be exposed to the internet. So, that's a key one. You can apply host-based firewalls in order to block ports that aren't needed, or that basically aren't needed on your system to run, to function correctly. So those are the type of things you can do, I guess, firewall-wise. Anything that you can think of on that?
Yeah. Just elaborating on the firewall situation that you mentioned there. We've touched on this, I think, in previous episodes, where your firewall is it's something that has to be, frequently massaged, unless you're just in such a static environment that nothing, rarely changes. But it's very important to do some sort of assessment or audit of the firewall rules, because what you're essentially doing when you set up firewall rules are, what ports can talk to what IPs, what protocols can be used through the firewall. So if over time, as maybe people come and go within the organization that are responsible for firewall management, you can get an outdated set of firewall rules. So all of a sudden you've got protocols, you've got ports, you've got services that should be blocked that are not being blocked. So it's very important, at least once or twice a year, highly encourage some sort of firewall audit. And there are tools out there to assist you with that.
That's a great point, Fred. About not mismanage it really, but the pass down to another administrator, or set it and kind of forget it type of mentality. So it's always good to go review that configuration. Absolutely.
One other thing I want to mention before we wrap up here is whenever you have choices with certain ports you can use, we mentioned HTTP and HTTPS. Always take the more secure. When you're configuring connectivity, like if I've got a website out there that I'm managing, force the user to connect to me via HTTPS using secure socket layer with certificates, as opposed to exposing that website to possible defamation or data scraping or whatever, some other sort of exploit by using just the non-standard port 80. SSL provides some added security. I'm thinking about another situation, Ldap. Ldap, calling from memory, I think it's 389 for your authentication protocols for domain controllers. You can use a secure Ldap method by using certificates and change that port to 636. So whenever you can, or secure FTP versus FTP, there's all these different things where you can take the standard ports that everyone knows and are more easily attacked, flip those to a more secure port. And again, that's just adding that layer of additional capabilities on your defensive side of things that could prohibit some sort of attack from being successful.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Fred. And also things like Telnet versus SSH. I mean, oftentimes you'll have Telnet open. Doesn't need to be. Nobody's been using it, or maybe people do use it. And there's SSH available as well. So I always choose to do the more secure version rather than the Telnet plain text passing of your credentials. Disable that if possible. Use SSH. But then it's also important to mention that, if you are going to use SSH, to change the default credentials on your appliances, because it can be secure. You think it's secure, and all of a sudden, well, they Googled the default credentials and now they have access to it. So it's just a common mistake that administrators make when deploying devices.
Great point. Great point. So just to wrap up, so we've talked about disabling unnecessary services, locking down ports to a more secure variant or flavor of the port that will still allow that type of application traffic to occur. Doing your firewall audits, only allow ports through the firewall that are absolutely necessary to conduct business. Make sure you're doing logging on activity around different ports. Point your syslog information out of your firewall into a centralized logging solution. Certainly an advantage there. That way you have that single pane of glass where you can look at your firewall activity. But all those things can help build that defensive strategy that you need. Yeah. Well, let's call it a wrap on that one, Garrett. Appreciate it. Great input. Thank you for participating. And those of you out there listening, thank you for hanging out with us for a few minutes. Continue to review previous episodes. We would encourage that because we're talking about all these different controls that will help you as individuals, as network engineers, system administrators, CISOs out there, to think about things, help build a more complete cyber defensive strategy for your business. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll continue down the lane, I should say, of talking about CSC controls in upcoming episodes. So thanks again, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Goodbye.